Hi, folks. Welcome to the Booked and Busy podcast, where today we're talking about the art of female leads. I'm looking at this through the young adult literature lens, so before we get started into anything, I wanted to do an introductory little slide and little page on what is young adult literature and why this part is so important to me. From Oregon State University and the College of Liberal Arts at that university, it defined young adult literature as fiction that deeply resonates with the unique experiences and challenges faced by adolescents. These novels often explore themes of identity, self-discovery, and the transition to adulthood, providing readers with relatable narratives that mirror their own journeys. I think for me, I have a similar definition of young adult literature. But really, what we've been talking about throughout this course and throughout my understanding of it in my own lifetime, young adult literature focuses on characters that are typically teenagers. I see a lot of 16-year-olds as those protagonists in young adult literature, but they're dealing with topics of like identity, friendship, longing, struggle, things that aren't only identity, but it does kind of boil down to that world. And I think young adult literature is expanding even more, but I think authors tend to put their books in young adult literature because it is reaching an audience of teenagers. It's not typically picked up by an adult, even though we're seeing a little bit of a shift of that currently. It's more typically geared towards teenagers themselves. So I focused a lot in this course on female stories and female stories written by female authors, because I find that that's the most important way to translate to female readers, is to be novels written by females. And I think the bigger thing that I wanted to focus on is females at the front. I think a lot of times authors want to put females in secondary roles, and they do have a purpose and a use, but females at the front is something that really does translate well with their female readers. And I think I looked a lot at dystopian novels as my example of why I felt that there was a disconnect with female leads and why male leads were such a huge thing within literature. Because a lot of times when I was growing up, dystopian novels focused strongly on just male leads. I think the biggest examples that I had was The Maze Runner and the understanding of like Percy Jackson and things like that. But the biggest example as well is Harry Potter and how those male leads are kind of defining young adult literature in the modern day, but that my big moment where I was like, I love feminist literature, I love female leads, is Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games. And that was kind of the tonal shift and the shift within society where female leads were seen as acceptable and seen as strong characters to have, that it wasn't a choice anymore to put females in the front, that it was something that always needed to be happening. And I think for me with Katniss wasn't just a female lead with female characteristics. Oh, she's motherly. Oh, she's caring. But she's motherly and caring to Primrose in the sense of like motherhood and what we think of as female characters. But even further, she's motherly and caring to her country, to the cause that she has. She's stumbling through it like a teenager, and she's stumbling through it with feminist focus, and with a focus that doesn't just feel as though it's propaganda as activism, that is a strong choice for relatability with young girls. And that was my moment of being like, I guess maybe I'm a feminist, but it was also my moment of understanding how strong it is to have a female lead in these characters. And it's relatively new. It's something when I was researching, it's something that is not commonly done within the beginning of literature, which is obvious. Men were the ones that were allowed to write and were allowed to read in these spheres, and it was something so new for females. But it is something that I think is a conversation that's not happening, but the shift is happening. The shift is happening to have more female leads. The shift is happening to have more female authors. And I think something that I cite is book talk and the idea of, if you don't know, in the TikTok world, there are different subdivisions of where people kind of end up. As we know, the algorithm likes to give you content that you are wanting. And a sphere that people have been calling book talk is the sphere of where people are reading multiple books and they're relating and trying to present all these books so that you read them and that you're involved with them. And I think when I was looking at that in TikTok and just growing up, book talk to me was very predominantly female. A lot of the stories were female. A lot of stories were also romance, and that has its own problems. But I think the conversation of books and literature is becoming more female, and I think that there are limitations with this. I think there is a conversation to have with that, but I do think that it's getting younger girls to read again. I think for me, growing up, reading was not the thing because the technology was coming out and, oh, you got to play this new game and, oh, you got to do this. I mean, I'm playing Barbie games at the age of 13, and I think now I know my 13-year-old sister is reading again because of the conversations that are happening of reading on the internet and things like book talk. So I think with that, the need to be having female leads in these books is more pressing than ever, because these females are seeing book talk and they're seeing literature be in the scope again. And it's so important to be having these female characters because someone needs to relate to somebody. And I think that's kind of a thing that I'm going to talk about a lot today is someone needs to be able to relate to somebody and someone needs to be able to have empathy. It's something that we're losing, and it's something that is pressing. And I think with the younger generation, it is so important more than ever to build empathy and to build backbone. So I go to my second section, which is long history of keeping women out of the protagonist role. And I could name listless classics that are leaving women out of the protagonist role. I can also name classics that have women in the protagonist role. But I think I wanted to relate it back to the course, and I wanted to relate it to kind of our understanding in the modern day of how women have been left out. I mentioned Harry Potter, I mentioned The Maze Runner as males dominating the stories, and that's just always kind of been a thing. But I think within this course, we read Feed, and this was our last book, and I have my copy here because I wanted to present some visual things. I think Feed was our last book, and it was the one that I had a hard time reading. Because it was just kind of like, and that's kind of the example of the book is saying like, but for me, it was a strong story and a strong world building, but it lacked within its characters. It lacked in relating. It lacked in building readers that have perspective, I think, in a sense. And I'm probably going to look back on this and be like, oh, I just didn't understand Feed. And that I understand it now. But I think the big thing for me was that Violet is an underlooked character. She's a character in a female role that could have been so much more for the story, and I wish she was the protagonist in some ways. If you don't know, Feed is, I believe, 2002, a novel written by M.T. Anderson, who is a male. And it focuses on the idea of having internet feed implanted into our brains so that we're able to communicate through our brains, but also with a sense that it evolved so hard that advertisers were able to tap into your brain at any point. So whatever you're thinking, they're able to advertise to you. Freaky kind of stuff. And it does that really well. And I think the reason that I said I wanted Violet to be the protagonist is because she is the character that is going against that idea the most. She gets the feed implanted into her when she's 7 years old, which is a lot later than everyone else, which is a freaky thought to have because I know that we're having these conversations about phones and things, and the younger and younger it's happening, scarier it's happening. I would not give a phone to an infant, and the idea of feed is that you're given a phone to an infant, which is insane. But Violet is a character for Titus, our protagonist, our male protagonist, who is a teenager, who is so obsessed with the idea of popularity in a sense, and the idea of just friendship bonding. But he takes a liking to Violet due to her ideas, her smartness, and her attractiveness. And it's something that is super underdeveloped, I feel like, and something that just isn't utilized correctly. Violet is the stereotypical manic pixie dream girl, and I don't have a journal article like manic pixie dream girl definition, but to me, manic pixie dream girl is the girl that is the foil to the male and what makes the male himself. The idea is like Peter Pan and Wendy. Wendy is strong in her own sense, but if you really think about those two characters boiled down, Wendy is there to make Peter Pan think. And I think with Violet, Violet is there to make Titus think. And a lot of times conversations that are happening in this novel are very negative towards Violet and don't really allow her to be herself. And I think a lot of the times when she is talking to Titus about what she wants to do and the life that she wants to live, he's undermining her constantly. And I think that's just so negative to put to female readers. Like, even I was kind of like, wow, is this how we talked about women in the 2000s? Because every idea that she had, he was just underwhelmed with. And I think throughout the novel, it's not super apparent. It's not from day one that he's being this way. I think he notes in part 3, I believe it's called Utopia, part 3, he notes that she's smarter than him, but that's what makes him kind of attracted to her, and that she's not undermining him. But then at the same time, he takes that and says that she's undermining him, and that she's trying to be smarter than him, which is kind of just contradictory in a sense. And it brings her down as a character, and it brings the reader to dislike Violet in senses. And I think for me as a college student reading feed, I'm not sitting there thinking those thoughts, because I know from my knowledge of reading, from the understanding of who I am, that I love her as a female character, and I think that she's really strong in what she does. But to a younger audience, that influence and that relatability, and if you're a female reading that, you're thinking, do men truly think that I need to shut up, that I'm not allowed to be smarter than them, that the conversations that I'm having and the memories and the wants that I have are not important? And I think that was my biggest gripe with Feed, was that it was like, Titus never once really cared until the end. And I think that could have been Anderson's approach, that Violet was there to make Titus think, but why do we need a female to make a male think? Let's just think about that. Let's just think about how we don't need a female to be a tool for male stories. And it goes back to my idea of relatability. And if a female sits there and relates to Violet and sees what Titus treats her as, she's seeing her worth of what Titus treats Violet as. And that's so harmful to an adolescent mind, to someone that is building themselves in that moment, and they're seeing what can happen to their vulnerability. And I think that's why I really started looking at this idea. So, and it made me ask, why is it harmful? Cincinnati's Children website says, during adolescence, between 12 and 18 years of age, the developing teenager gains the ability to think systemically about all logical relationships within a problem. And I took that as like, they're able to see the idea and they're able to understand the relationships that they have around them. And I think if they're able to develop the understanding of the relationships that they have, that seeing Titus and Violet and how destructive they are, they're developing that idea right then. And if they're developing that idea of what relationships are, and they're seeing not toxic, but not a great representation of it, they could potentially take that as an example of what they should or shouldn't do. Further, it says some adolescents may be able to apply logical operations to schoolwork before they are able to apply them to personal problems. When emotional issues come up, they can add an additional level of complexity for an adolescent's cognitive reasoning. So the understanding for me with that quote as well is a kid can be good at math. A kid can be good at understanding logarithmic algorithms. I obviously wasn't, and like science, but they're understanding the idea of emotional issues at that time, and they're understanding how to react at that time. And if they're looking at these examples and they're looking at this destructiveness, it's not helping the idea of them growing in their emotional intelligence. And I think this is a vital time for authors to need to create strong perspectives and strong influences. It's a vital time for, I don't like saying to create a lesson, because not all the time is a story trying to create a lesson. And I think we see that a lot in adult literature. But I think that young adult literature authors know that the audience that they have is not an audience that is completely sound with their identity. And I think if they use that in a poor way, they know that it is going to be read in different interpretations. And I think they need to understand their audience, and they need to understand the world that they're trying to build. I know M.T. Anderson, like I said, was the early 2000s, and I think feminism has not been a new concept, but I don't know what it was like in the 2000s. I believe we were still in third wave feminism, which was the idea of having feminists in work. And that kind of could have influenced his book, but I don't think it was a time like now where feminism is ever changing. And the conversations we're having is how diverse feminism is becoming. So I think that M.T. Anderson has to understand that creating Violet in this light can just be harmful. And I'm saying it over and over, but it can just be harmful. And I know for myself, it made me queasy, and I cannot imagine what it would be like for my 13-year-old sister to be reading that and to be thinking about herself in that light. So it moves me to my section 3 of putting a female in a lead role. And when I was starting this project, I was thinking of Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, and I had not read the novel yet, nor had I seen any reviews, but I thought of it because he did have a female lead role in Turtles All the Way Down, and I wanted to know how he had interpreted females in the female gaze and how that influenced his story, and if he did it correctly. And I think I put this section in because I don't want to be sitting here being like, male authors are awful. And being like, male authors that only write about males, boo, bad. Because I do think that males need to be reading, and the number one way to get them, and I'll get into that, but the number one way of getting them to read is having a male in a lead role. But with Turtles All the Way Down, I think the only thing that I had to mention and why I felt that it was important to put it in the podcast was because gender is not a mention within the novel. And I think that's a strong choice that Green makes, and I think it's a right choice that he does make because he probably is afraid of interpreting the character wrong. But the character, if you don't know, has OCD and anxiety. Aza is the protagonist, and she's dealing with a female friendship and longing for a teenage boy. And she's dealing with the ideas of OCD and anxiety. And he does do those diseases well, and he does shine a really good representation light on those ideas. But I think even further, I sometimes wished that Aza's gender was acknowledged because I am someone that does have anxiety. And I do think that sometimes my gender can kind of influence my idea of anxiety and influence my outlook on my world around me. And I think that was the only thing that kind of made me feel like, is it all right to have a character that doesn't conform to gender identity a lot of the time and isn't always thinking about it? And I think, yes, I think it depends on your audience and it depends on the story you're trying to tell. Obviously, with John Green's Turtles All the Way Down, he's trying to tell a story about OCD and anxiety. And I think that there's only so much you can do with 300 to 400 pages in a young adult literature book, and you want to always keep them engaged. And I think with what he was doing, he did it well. And I wanted to just sit here and say that it's not impossible to put a female lead in as a male author, and that John Green did kind of pave a way of saying that you don't have to know everything about being a female to be a male author writing about a woman. And I wish that that would happen more. And I think it is, and I think we're shifting, but I think that it's something that needs to be justified. And I think that female leads is something that is just so important to me that it doesn't mean it needs to be in one box of only being female authors that write about them. But it leads me to my fourth section, which is about female leads written by women. And I think throughout my time in this course, I have been so lucky to be able to read so many books about females by females. And I applaud it. I applaud it so much because I think it just sparks reading again, and it sparks the want to read again, because I'm seeing these stories of cultures that I'm not a part of, but I know what I relate to, and that's being a female. And I think that it's so important to be telling those stories and to be relating those stories. As I said, I will get into the idea of relating and empathy even more towards the end, but I think it's the one thing that connects all of this and why it is so important for female readers to be reading about female leads by female authors. So within this course, I read Who the F Are You, Firekeeper's Daughter, and Legendborn. That are the three that I wanted to really depict as having strong female leads. There's plenty others that had strong female leads in them as well, but these are the three that kind of resonated with me, and those are the three that also talk the most about culture. So I don't have a copy of Who the F Are You, but Who the F Are You is written by Huda Fahmy, and it's a graphic novel that follows a young girl named Huda through her journey in high school and dealing with racism. It talks about family and prejudice in a palpable way through quick reading and imagery. Who the F Are You is one of the quickest reads that we had throughout the class, but it's also one of the funniest. And Huda also, the author, mentions that she wanted to be funny, that she knew the hardships that she had, but that she wanted to be funny in the end. And I think that goes back to our relatability over here. But from Penguin Teen, Fahmy writes, far too many people were being given opportunities and platforms to spew their ignorance, fear, and hatred towards Muslims. And also, but I've had enough. I now know who I was and what I had to do. Sorry, I read the quote wrong. But I think the big thing here is that we're talking about male authors, and we're talking about this ignorance that they're shedding on something that they completely do not understand. And she here is saying that as a Muslim woman, it was her call to talk about these things in a true light. And I think that goes with why I'm so strong on female leads being written by females, because there is truth. Why would we want to be teaching these young girls something that isn't true, something that someone doesn't understand? Like I said with John Green, he knew, I'm putting words in his mouth, but I feel that he knew he didn't know about women. Like, he didn't know what he was going to be writing about with a teenage girl if he did talk about periods, and if he did talk about liking boys and training bras and things like that. And I appreciate it, because we don't want to hear that. Why would we want to spew lies to younger girls about their own livelihoods, autonomy, and ideas? And I think that's why it's so strong to have female authors, because they know. And when they're writing these characters, obviously with Huda Fahmy and her character Huda, she's writing a lot about herself within her own character. So these are her truths that she's telling in a literature light and in a fun light, so that girls can understand her story, but also relate to her story and fill themselves in. And I think that's a huge thing with cartoons, but I won't get into that today. And further with it, I wanted to read some reviews because I wanted to understand who these people are and who, how do I say this? How they're like relating to this author. So one of the reviews says, to feel seen is a vulnerable thing, and when it comes to representation, I tend to shy away from media with Muslims in it because inevitably I end up being hurt. Whether it's because the rep is offensive / comes at the sake of other Muslims, or because it requires me to confront and acknowledge my own trauma. But Huda does this flawlessly in Who the F Are You. Sorry that I butchered that review. But basically that review is kind of talking about how she wasn't looking for Muslim stories a lot of the times because it is such a vulnerable thing to see your representation taken poorly. Huge thing to think about. To think about your representation in a poor light and that you are shying away from it, you're shying away from yourself. And I think that's so huge with young adult literature and the idea of identity, like we talked about before, how so many of these are about self-identity. And if they're shying away from their own identity, isn't that such a harmful thing to be putting on these young teenagers? So I really resonated with that review, because I said, this is why I'm talking about this. And even further, another review had said, Huda always blesses me with the perfect blend of relatability and humor, and feelings like this was so great. I can't wait to have it in my hands to gush over at all over again. It's back to that relatability. And it's back to that understanding of ourselves to relating. And I just think that this novel does a glorious job at being palpable to younger audiences. It's a quick read. I think even in the group that I was in, we had discussed that this read could be like middle school because of how simple it was. And like I mentioned before, I didn't even realize that I said this. When John Green didn't write about periods, Huda Fahmy did. And she did it in a great light. It was such a quick moment, but it was a moment that I felt seen. And the drawings were 100% accurate. Huge news for someone that has grown up with the idea of menstruation being a taboo, and we're finally getting out of that. And I don't think a man could have done that. Let's be honest there. I don't think a man could have done that. So I wanted to use Who Da For You as my introductory to this, but also as a call of like teaching. I think that this novel really works well with this idea of females need to be written by females. Like I said, with menstruation, and I think it tackles subjects that are just, they're so hard to say, but they're so right in the moment. Further, I have the copy of Firekeeper's Daughter written by Angelina Bowley. I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I have that copy with me today. Big book, let me tell you, but a book packed with understanding of Native American tribes, of being mixed race, of understanding, coincidentally, drugs, and a lot of like just some harsh topics. So my synopsis of it is the novel follows the story of Dawness Fontaine as she tries to understand her identity through the Anishinaabe, I definitely butchered that, tribe, and being a member of a white family. Through this, she finds out of an underground drug selling system and teams up with the FBI to stop this. Bally is tackling the idea of prejudice throughout this novel and what we project onto others and the truth. So I think this one was a harder read in the beginning because I didn't know where the narrative was going, but I do strongly appreciate the words. She's a poet. Do I know that for sure? No. But with a lot of the words that she had, it felt like you were being seen left and right. So I pulled some quotes from it so that we can kind of understand it. So one of the quotes is, "It's hard when someone says they love you, but they need to contain and control things that make you, you." Another quote is, "Auntie has shown me how to be a strong Nishikwi, full of love, anger, humor, sorrow, and joy." So I think those ones were the biggest ones that I found of self-identity. Those are the biggest ones where women are telling each other how to be a woman. Huge. Huge, and I'm not going to cry. But that is like, huge. Just to have a female role model as a female that isn't seeing ourselves in media a lot is just something that young girls need to cherish. And even further, I have quotes of fear and men. So one of the quotes is, "Her sister was afraid of men and had to sleep with her back against the wall." And another is, part of my language, "It's so fucked up when a mom enables her boy instead of raising a man." Yeah. This book is written for young girls that have been screwed over by men. And isn't it so releasing and great to hear that? Isn't it so amazing to hear what you need to sometimes within novels? And I think what I wrote is women are loved throughout this novel. Every woman is strong in their own ways, and these quotes highlight this. There's nothing this female protagonist can't do, but we see through her all her struggles and strengths she has. She's complex and is a figure young girls can see as themselves, but also something they want to be. Oh yeah. And even further, this novel is for the girls that are sick of men, like I just said. You want something to make you feel fired up as a woman, you pick this book up. It's something that is just so incredible, and I think, I don't have a source for this, but I believe that a lot of Native American young women also aligned with this book a lot because of the truths that it had within that culture, and it just makes you feel seen. And to be able to relate to a story that is totally crazy, the drug busting and the FBI, like that type of part, I don't know if many can relate to, but many can relate to the idea that why can't we raise our sons correctly? Why can't men stop trying to take what makes us us? And I think that's something, and this is a relatively new novel, I believe. That's something that needs to be talked about more in the classrooms. That's something that needs to be talked about more at home. I think mother and daughter relationships are something that are huge, but even further, aunties, cousins, things like that. I think family is something that is overlooked sometimes, and this novel just does it so well. So well to be writing about a female in a female gaze. So even further, I have, and I have my copy with me, another big book, Legend Board by Tracy Dion. Sorry if I say that wrong. Oh, and I'm dropping it. Legend Born, this book follows Bree Matthews, who wants to go to the UNC Chapel Hill College and gets into the early college program after her mother's passing. On her first night there, her and her friend Alice are invited to a party where Bree sees magic for the first time. Once seeing this, Bree is determined to discover her mother's true reason for passing and discover herself. She finds out of the long lineage she has in magic and the power she possesses. I love this book for the way it's written, like, first and foremost. I think it's written so beautifully. But I also think that it is so strong, that character she has of Bree Matthews, someone that is dealing with racism left and right. If you don't know, from the cover as well, Bree Matthews is a black girl who constantly is struggling with the idea of being black. And this follows the Arthur Knight lore. I don't know much about that, and I'm so sorry. But the Arthur Knight is very known for being white. And this whole kind of mythical stuff that they're dealing with is a very whitewashed story. And so it's interesting to see a black female character be the lead of this story, and how Tracy Dion deals with white people and their reaction to this. Amazing, because it's something that is just so overlooked and something that needs to be told to white people. And I think for me, a white person, it was great. It was great to hear this, to hear the honesty, hear the history, and still be able to relate to Bree Matthews as a woman and as someone that is also being undermined. So I also pulled quotes, and there's a juicy quote in this book about gender and race, and I'm just going to read it off. It says, 2 faults, my race and my gender, but they are not faults, they are strength, and I am more than this man can comprehend. I want that plastered in my daughter's room in the future. I want that in big, bold letters. That is amazing. That is amazing. To see that, to hear that as an adult, I cannot imagine hearing that at 14. And hearing that someone feels that too. That you're looking in a man's eyes and you're going, he doesn't know what I'm going through. He doesn't know what goes through my mind. He doesn't know the things that I deal with at all. And I think that goes to why I'm talking about female authors and female leads and how males can't do that. He doesn't know. He doesn't know your struggle. And it is so important to acknowledge that as a woman sometimes, and it takes a really long time. It took for me until college to really start addressing that and to really start tapping into what it is to be a feminist. And I think to be giving that to young adult readers, amazing. You're building a great generation. Let me see if I have any more quotes. I do. One of the quotes says, greedy men collect what they cannot understand, and weak men destroy what they cannot control. And Tracy Dion does an amazing job of understanding men within her story and understanding how it feels to just be undermined the entire time. I'm going to read my little 2 tidbits on this again. This novel tackles race and gender, especially through the idea of who can be a leader. Bree is a strong example of a strong woman within a novel. She never lets down, and when she does, it's understandable. Her thoughts and feelings are relatable. As well, this novel deals with grief, something I'm not talking about. Mad at the way I wrote that. Something I'm not talking about within this episode, but something that Tracy Dion deals with grace. Yeah, it's a novel that is perfect to read at a right time, but it's also perfect to read whenever. It has so many things that you relate to, and we'll talk about that. And there's so many things that you can relate to and understand and talk about. It has a subject that is enticing. It's pulling you in constantly, and it's something that could just be so fun to explore in a classroom, because there's a lore to it and an understanding of history and whitewashing and male dominance. And then there's an understanding of how do we move forward from that. I love it. So these 3 novels, I'll remind you, Who Dat For You by Huda Fami, Firekeeper's Daughter by Angelina Jolie, and Legend Born by Tracy Dion need to be in the classroom so fast. So fast. So I get into 4, which is shaping identity. Books and novels do something well without us looking at it or for it. It produces relatability and empathy. I think that's huge. There's this study, a lot of quotes that I pulled from this, and I'm not going to read all of it because I'm getting really long. But there's a study by Shauna L. Blackshire at West Virginia University in 2004. And please let me know if you want me to post this anywhere, because this was a really interesting study to read through. But it's a study about the connection of empathy and identity, and what is empathy at the end of the day. And it's tested on 212 males and 320 females. Let me check something. Oh, my camera just paused. So let's start that again. Okay, hopefully my camera stays on. Okay. Anyways, going back. Shauna L. Blackshire at West Virginia University in 2004 did a study on 212 males and 320 female adolescents in grades 9 through 11 at public high schools in alopecia. And I looked at her second hypothesis, and it said within her conclusions that support for the second hypothesis was found in the form of strong correlations between empathy and identity, and empathy and fidelity. The direction of the correlations between the subscales of empathy and identity suggests the identity achievement is linked to the positive portions of empathetic thinking, i.e. empathetic concern and perspective. So I found this, and it's hard to see the evidence, and it's hard to truly understand because, oh my gosh, I'm not a science. I'm not a psychology major. But my understanding of it was that identity is a direct correlation to empathy in its positive ways. That empathy and positivity kind of connects to who we shape ourselves as. And I think that through this study, it was seen through perspective. Perspective was the biggest thing that kind of correlated with it. And that's what novels do. Hey, that's what novels do. Novels create perspective on problems, and seeing that positive correlation with identity, it's further proving the idea that self-identity is in these novels. And I'll just read the results of it. It says, the results of this study show some interesting associations between identity, empathy, and perhaps creative activity participation through the filter of gender. The implication of these associations is that we should further examine how they, empathy and identity and creativity, may be linked so that the information gleaned from research can be used to help adolescents grow into confident, healthy adults, and to let adults better understand what they can do to encourage positive development in all areas. Oh, that's a mouthful. That's a mouthful, and I didn't even read all of that. But it's saying that as adults, we need to be encouraging the idea of positive empathy to create these identities. And I further wrote, empathy helps us see ourselves, but also see where we stand apart. It grows with its idea that we know where we relate and where that ends, but still give love nonetheless. I think that's something that's important to literature, because I'm a woman that have read plenty of novels with males as the lead, and I'm still able to relate to an aspect of the novel. I think that's important with males as well when they would read novels with female leads. And I think that's something that's important to say, because that's kind of the antithesis to what I'm saying is, well, are men going to read books about females? They don't have to. Hey, not every book's for you. But that there is an ability to. In our class, plenty of men had to read books with female leads in it. And I don't think that they sat there being... I think there's an aspect that you can relate to almost anything. And that's what empathy's for. If we're building empathy from the beginning, it's that understanding that I can build my identity with the idea of myself, but that also you can build your identity through aspects that you see in others that isn't you, but that you can seek out and can be kind about. And I said even further, literature is a growing idea of empathy through looking at experiences, and it does shape the idea of our identity through characters in relation to the reader. Mouthfuls. And we're getting to the end, and I've been talking a while. But my fifth section is what are our next steps? Because we could have these conversations all the time about why females are important, but what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And my thing was teach books with female leads. I think that's the most important from the start, is teach books with female leads. So sorry, they're moving everything apparently around here. There's enough classics that we can teach with male leads, but teaching with female leads is teaching the idea of importance of females, and teaching these younger female girls that there are books about them, for them, and that there are stories that are being told about their lives and that they can relate to. And reading starts in the classroom. I'm just going to be honest. I think you can have a hobby of reading for sure, and I think that parents can teach it, but we're getting closer and closer to the idea that parents aren't teaching how to read anymore. Oh, and that's scary. And I think that reading starts in the classroom from day one, and if we are teaching what books to read and how to start with these ideas of female authors and female leads and these concepts, that we're encouraging to look and search for these novels, to look for more novels like this. And it just starts there. Even further, reading these novels in our everyday life. I think that it's an encouragement for younger girls to be reading these novels in their everyday life, looking at the younger generation. But I think even adults need to be reading these types of stories. I think it's an example that we create when we read these types of stories in front of them. And I think when we're talking and we're having conversations about these stories, it's encouraging younger generations to read these stories. And it's encouraging this idea of finding ourselves in our novels. And if we're having those conversations of, well, I can say any day, every day, The Hunger Games has shaped me as a woman from day one. It has shaped my idea of who it is to be a female in a world where I feel like everything's being destroyed. And even further, what do we gain from female-led literature? We gain a sense of understanding each other. And I think with females, we understand our feminine energy more. With Who the F Are You having a menstruation scene in it, females that don't have a menstruation cycle, well, haven't started their period yet, I'll say that, can understand what that's like for females, can understand what it might look like and how it feels. But even further, those that already have it are feeling related to. And we're feeling that feminine energy of like, yeah, that's how I feel. That's how I feel every day. And I think even further, it's like the quote from Firekeeper's Daughter before, it's so fucked up when a mom enables her boy instead of raising a man. We need to start teaching younger boys to see these perspectives as well. Encouraging female-led books may or may not start the conversation of males reading these books as well. And I hope it does. I hope in the classroom it's always encouraged. But with having that encouragement, maybe we can start raising men. Yeah. Because I think with empathy, we're starting to raise a better generation. And if we start putting that empathy in the seeds now with younger boys, those boys are going to know what it's like to be a female. They're not going to be sitting there doing the dumb things I see in college, but also doing the dumb things I see in the workforce. And I think that's so huge. And young adult literature just has the power to shape teens. Young adult literature has this goal, like I said before, to be palpable to younger generations, and to be palpable to these teenagers. They're not, I wanted to read classics when I was 16, but that's because I was crazy and I loved literature. But I think for people that aren't always the avid reader, young adult literature books are the first thing that they can pick up, understand, and actually evaluate and sit there and know what they're talking about. And they're actually able to relate, and they're actually able to form thoughts on it because it's so easy to access in some ways. And now there's some that are a little bit harder. I think Legendborn is one of them that can kind of be like, there's a lot of words, especially like Firekeeper's Daughter as well. And that's why I bring up Who the F Are You though, because that is so palpable to the younger generation. And it's such an easy, I'll say, gateway book to getting into this concept. And even further, I had read an article. I'm going to have to pull up the actual article name really fast. Let me find it. Here we go. I read the article Blurring Gender Lines in Reader's Advisory for Young Adults, which is written by Beth M. Bridler, a guest columnist. And I pulled this quote that said, early researchers in gender and literacy reported that children thought in terms of girl books and boy books, and that girls tended to respond to text via their emotions and feelings about the characters in books, while boys connected to what the characters did in the story. If we're putting females in the female lead role, that line's blurring. And I think that boys can relate more when they see a girl in a female role because she's doing the action. That's a huge thing in Legendborn with Bree, and she's doing the action, and that creates the genders to understand each other and have empathy with each other and not be in these conformed boxes. Even further, it says, research indicated that children and teens preferred protagonists that are the same gender as the reader. Yeah. As I'm saying this really hopeful point, it is true that females are going to go for female books and males are going to go for male books. And I think with that, we need to have more female stories because females want to be seen. If we're not doing that, we're making young girls feel like they don't have the power in their voice. And it is just so important to go back to the basics and know that females want to read female stories. But like my quote further, I wish I kind of switched them, but like my quote further, I think we're blurring those lines. And I think blurring those lines is going to come with female leads. Even further, I wrote another quote that the incredible demand for dystopian and post-apocalyptic fiction is a contradiction of the notion that most girls not like action, conflict, or science fiction. That's my example of the Hunger Games. And sorry that I butchered that quote again. But that these dystopian books with female leads is showing that girls like action too. And I think it's really important that we're encouraging that all day, every day. That's this episode. And very long-winded. I just want to say at the bottom of my heart, young adult literature is so important. And reading more young adult books this semester has been so enlightening and has really helped wanting to read again. And I think that's the importance of young adult literature, is that not all the time does a book have to be incredibly profound. What it needs to do is it needs to tell a story. And I think young adult literature can tell a story about self-identity from someone that is confident in herself and someone that is not. And I think that's just so important. And I think that teaching novels in schools that speak on our identity, especially females, is so important now with what's happening. And I hope that this encourages you to understand that we want this, that empathy is so important to have within books, and getting that is to have roles where people can relate. So yeah, thanks for listening. Let me know if you need anything. Let me know as well if I need to post any of these articles for further reading or for further understanding, and I will see you next time. Thank you.